Hello and welcome to this session, and in this session we shall begin our journey of pattern programming. In this session, particularly to start with, I would wish to tell you as to how you can print a star on the screen. Well, in C language, this is the line of code that shall help you print a star on the screen. In Java, this is the line of code that shall enable you to print a star. Well, I'm sure that as a beginner, you might be wondering as to what really system is and what really out is and all that. But for the time being, forget about all of that. I'm sure you can understand that definitely print star is going to be printing a star on the screen. And in case you ask as to how we do the same in Python, then this is the line of code that shall enable you to be printing a star on the screen in Python. Well, again here you would have seen a piece of code that is not understood at this point in time, but then all of that definitely I shall be clarifying moving forward. But all said and done, I am sure that you have been able to understand as to how you can print a star on the screen using the top 3 programming languages. Well, that way, if you'll ask me that really in C language, by just writing this one line of code, would we be able to get a star on the screen? Definitely no. Every programming language shall have its own set of rules, and whenever we are going to be coding a program in a certain programming language, then we obviously have to be abiding by the rules of that particular programming language. Well, in C language, no doubt, print star shall be printing a star on the screen, but then around the print star, you will also have to have a hash include stdio.h, and then you will also have to have a void main function this way. Well, I'm sure again that just in case you are not aware of the C programming language, then all of these lines of code could be confusing, and all that I can tell for such of my learners is to go through my course on the C programming language. But all said and done, keep the rest of the code aside. Just focus on the core part of the logic, and I'm sure that this particular statement, that is printf star, shall definitely print a star on the screen. That way, you have already understood that in Java, this is the line of code that shall enable us to print a star. But then, if you'll ask me whether this one line alone can print a star on the screen in Java, no. As I have already told you that every programming language is always going to have its own set of rules, and if you have to code a program in a certain programming language, then it is necessary for you to follow the rules of the language. And here, since this line of code is in Java, and if really this program has to execute, then you also need to bring in certain more attachments to this code. What are the attachments? Well, this happens to be the first attachment to the code, public class print star. Well, I'm sure you would be wondering as to what really public is and what really class is and all of that. But then at this point in time, all that I would wish to say is not to worry about these extra attachments. Well, if you'll ask me whether this much is sufficient in Java to print a star on the screen, no, we will have to bring in this piece of code as well. Public static void main of string args. Well, in case you are not well versed in Java, then all that I would wish to say is that you definitely need to take up my course on Java. But at this point in time, this course being a course on pattern programming, you can for the time being neglect all of this and let your focus be on the core part of the code, which is this line. And that too, in this line, what your focus has to be on this part, that is print star. And anyway, all of these extra attachments to this is to enable the program to execute successfully and print a star on the screen. All said and done, this happens to be the complete code to print a star on the screen using Java. But then what is the story in Python? Let me tell you. Well, in Python, this is the line of code that is going to print a star on the screen. But then Python happens to be such a programming language wherein by writing just this one line of code that you can get the required output. That way, if you'll ask me, are there no extra attachments to Python required to print a star on the screen? Well, as I have told you, only this line of code also can serve the purpose, or we may also have an attachment like this. Well, when we need to have an attachment and when it can serve and when we really need not have any attachment is something which is specific to Python as a programming language, and definitely when you will watch my course on Python, it shall become completely clear to you. But at this point in time, all that I would wish to tell is that in Python, even by writing just this one line of code, that you can be getting a star on the screen. So all said and done, I'm sure that you now understand that this happens to be the complete program in C language. This happens to be the complete program in Java, and these happen to be the two variants that are available for you to print a star on the screen in Python. Well, that way I'm sure you have been able to understand that based on the programming language, we may have different kind of attachments that should match with the rules of that programming language, but then the core part of the logic to print a star is well understood. So now it's time for me to tell you as to how you can print a line of stars. Say supposing I have to print a line of 5 stars like this. How do I do this? Well, in C programming language, you know that this happens to be the line of code that can print a single star on the screen. But now my requirement is not to print a single star, rather my requirement is to print 5 stars. So how to achieve it? Well, pretty simple. All that I have to do is to repeat this line of code 5 times like this. And now obviously these 5 lines of code shall be printing 5 stars on the screen. But then by now there could be a lot of doubts arising at the back of your mind, and some of the doubts that could be arising are, firstly, why haven't I written a single line of code like this? After all, by writing a single print command like this, I could have got 5 stars on a single line. Well, I shall answer this question moving forward, and some others might agree with this approach but might have a doubt at the back of their minds that maybe these print commands are going to print the stars vertically and not horizontally. Well, I shall answer that question as well, but then a few others could be thinking that anyway, these set of lines do not represent a complete C program because we do not have the attachments. So really, if I will add the required attachments like this and then execute the program, will I get the required output? Yes, of course. By executing this complete program, I shall be getting 5 stars horizontally like this. But then I know there are still a lot of doubts at the back of your mind, and I shall address each of the doubts one by one. So let me proceed. Well, I do agree that instead of these 5 lines of code, I could have had just one printf command with 5 stars inside this way. And if you'll ask me, would this be providing me with the required output? Yes, of course. I would have indeed got 5 stars on a single line on the screen upon the execution of this program, but then it's not programmatically a good approach. Why is it so? Well, say supposing I would ask you to print a hut of stars like this. Well, you can notice, after all, this hut has a roof and also has a door. And say supposing this is what I want to get printed on the screen, then will you really be able to do all of this using a single print command? Well, some of you may tell that yes, it is possible. All that we have to do is to bring in an attachment printf like this, and then maybe bring in extra attachments relevant to the C programming language like this, and then execute and get the required output. Well, we may get the required output, but the point is that in no way you shall be showcasing your expertise as a programmer just in case you plan to write your programs this way. This is the most absurd way of writing programs, and definitely your interviewers would not be impressed with this kind of programming. You need to showcase your programming skills not by just writing everything in a single print command and then saying that you have achieved the required pattern. Definitely this is unacceptable. You should always write your code in such a manner that the print command is going to have a single star in it. And then you should be writing the code around this print command in such a manner that you should be able to generate any of these patterns. Yes. Moving forward, you shall be learning that by having just a single star within the print command that you shall be able to achieve all of these different patterns. And really, if you'll have to learn about all of this, then you need to be continuing to watch this video series. But as of now, all that I would wish to tell is that having multiple stars in a single print command, particularly in pattern programming problems, is definitely unacceptable. So this approach is ruled out. Well, then is this approach of having a single star in 5 different print commands the right approach? Let me explain. Well, in this approach, no doubt we have used a single star in the print command and that we have repeated it 5 times, and if we really bring in the required attachments as per the requirements of the C programming language, then we shall be getting the required output. But then another question at the back of some of my learners could be that why are the stars not actually getting printed vertically? How is it that they are getting printed horizontally? Let me explain. If you really need to find an answer to your question, then what is important for you to understand is what actually happens when there is a single printf command. Say supposing I have just a single printf command like this, and then what really happens on the output screen? Well, even before the execution of this program, on the output screen, what I shall be having is a cursor blinking like this. And then upon the execution of this line of code, what happens is that a star gets printed. But then where does the star get printed? Obviously, the star shall be getting printed wherever the cursor is blinking. So this way the star gets printed on the output screen. But then what happens to that cursor? Well, the cursor just moves to the next location on the same line like this. In other words, what I really wanted you to understand is that the execution of this one line of code is no doubt going to print a star on the output screen, but then it shall also ensure that the cursor moves to the next position on the same line. Now, say supposing I have one more printf command like this. Well, you might have written the second printf command below the previous line, and you might be expecting that because you have written the second printf command below the previous line, that even the star as well gets printed below the previous star on the output screen. But then it shall not happen. Rather, what shall happen is that the star always gets printed wherever the cursor is blinking. Well, that way, due to this second line of code that you have now added, no doubt a star gets printed, but then it gets printed at the same place where the cursor is blinking. And then what happens to the cursor? Well, I have already told you that it shall move ahead by one position on the same line like this. And now, say supposing I have one more printf command like this. Well, by now I am sure you have understood that though you have written this third printf command below the previous one, yet the star gets printed at the same place where the cursor is blinking like this, and then the cursor moves ahead. And now, say supposing you are going to add 2 more lines of print command like this. Well, by now I am sure you understand that all that these 2 lines of code would do is to print 2 more stars on the output screen at the point where the cursor was blinking, and then obviously the cursor shall move ahead. So I am sure now you are clear with that doubt that though we have printed the stars one below the other in the code, why is it that they are all getting printed one besides the other on the output screen? I am sure that part of the doubt is clarified. But all said and done, if you will ask me, is this really a good way of coding? Well, definitely this is a better way of coding than actually coding all the stars in a single print command like this. Obviously, in pattern programming, this is an unacceptable style because you should definitely have just a single star in each print command, and that way, this way of coding is definitely better than having all the stars in a single line. But then, this is not the best way of coding. What really is the best way of coding so that we can get the 5 stars on the same line? Well, that is something that I shall definitely tell you as to what really is the best way of coding. But then, how do we achieve the same in Java? How do we achieve the same in Python? Let me explain. Firstly, let me take up the case of Java. Well, you know that this line of code is what shall be printing a single star on the screen. But then you already now know that no doubt a single star does get printed on the screen, but then the cursor would have been blinking just besides that star that would have got printed. So that way, if I will want 5 stars, all that I have to do is to bring in additional lines of code like this. And the moment I bring in this additional lines of code, I'm sure now there is no confusion at the back of your mind that because you have coded all of these lines one below the other, that the stars also will get printed one below the other. Definitely you have by now understood that that shall not happen, because every print command is going to print whatever you want to print, but then it shall be getting printed at the same place where the cursor is blinking. So that way this second print command in Java is definitely going to be printing the next star besides the previous star, and then the cursor moves ahead. That way the next 3 lines of code are going to be printing 3 more stars on the same line, and then the cursor moves ahead. So I'm sure by now you have been able to understand as to how you can be printing a horizontal line of stars in Java, but then let me tell you that you shall not be getting this output in Java. And why is it so? That is because this program itself is incomplete. After all, you know that if really the program has to execute, you need to abide by the rules of that programming language, and in Java, definitely I will have to enclose it within a class like this, and then I will also have to be bringing in the public static void main of string args like this. Well, I have already told you that just in case all of these extra fittings are confusing you, then all that you need to do is to watch my course on Java. But then keeping these extra fittings aside, I'm sure by now you have been able to understand that even though in Java you are coding the print commands one below the other, yet the output shall be having all the stars getting printed one besides the other, and I'm sure you have understood the reasons for it. All said and done, this is the complete program in Java that shall be providing us with the required output. Again, if you would ask me, is this the best way of writing the program? Definitely no. What is the best way of writing the program is something that I shall be discussing with you, but then this is a better way of writing the program when compared to writing all of the stars in a single line like this. I have already told you that particularly during pattern programming, never should you be writing a print command containing more than 1 star in it. That way, this is a print command in Java which is containing 5 stars in it, which is the most absurd way of coding, which is definitely not going to be acceptable to the interviewer. So all said and done, what you as a programmer has to ensure is that there is a single star in the print command, and that way if you really need 5 stars, then this way you need to be writing 5 lines of code, and this happens to be a better way when compared to writing all of the stars in a single print command. But then this is definitely not the best way. I shall be shortly introducing you the best way of writing the code, but then what is the story in case of Python? Well, let me tell you the Python story, and then after that I shall definitely introduce to you the best way of writing the program. In as far as the Python code is concerned, well, you already know that this is the line of code that shall enable us to print a single star on the screen. But then if you would need a horizontal line of 5 stars, then I need to bring in these additional lines of code, and then obviously if I would execute this, then I shall be getting the required result. Well, if you have a doubt at the back of your mind if really extra attachment code is not required in Python, then all that I would say is that even if you will bring in this extra attachment in Python and then execute the program, we would get the required result. But then what I wanted to highlight is that even without this extra attachment in Python, just these 5 lines of code also can provide us with the required results. All said and done, in this session, what you have been able to understand is how to print a single star on the screen and how really you can be printing a horizontal line of 5 stars on the screen. But then I have been all through this session telling you that definitely in this session, I have not told you the best way of writing the programs. Be it in C, be it in Java, or be it in Python, definitely the approach that I have spoken about in this session is not the best approach. And if you really have to know about the best approach, then all that you have to do is to continue watching this video series. Hope this introductory session was informative. I shall meet you in my next session with the best approach. Thanks for watching. Let's meet again in my next session.